had been just a few minutes since Amina had taken the twins outside. Yet the moment she turned her back, she heard a voice that froze her to the bone. What is going on here? James Leclerc stood at the entrance of his mansion's garden, his face a mix of fury and disbelief. Amina, standing between James and the twins, instinctively positioned herself as a shield. "I can explain," she said softly. James's voice trembled with a mixture of anger and fear. "You went against my wishes, took them out of the house without permission. You've put them at risk. Do you have any idea what you've done?" But then his gaze shifted. His jaw clenched. His heart skipped a beat. Clara was standing. Elijah was holding on to Amina's leg, struggling to find his balance, but standing nonetheless. The impossible had happened. "They're standing?" James whispered, his disbelief palpable. "Yes," Amina said quietly, watching the twins with a small, knowing smile. Both of them. James stood frozen, unable to comprehend what he was witnessing. His precious twins, who had never uttered a word or moved on their own, were walking slowly but steadily. And they weren't calling out for him. They were reaching for Amina, the black nanny he had hired just weeks ago. James's knees buckled. How? The question escaped him, but Amina didn't answer right away. She knew the answer was more complicated than he could understand in that moment. It wasn't just a miracle. "I'll tell you how," Amina began, "but first let me show you something." And with that, Amina's explanation began. A story that would change everything James thought he knew about parenting, about his children, and about the walls he had built to protect himself. To understand how they had gotten here, we need to go back to where it all began. Amina had been with the Leclerc family for 3 weeks now, and each day felt like a battle. Not with James. No, he was not the kind of man who raised his voice or demanded confrontation, but with the rules he had laid out for her. James's rigid schedule for his twins, Clara and Elijah, was something Amina couldn't ignore. Every hour of their day was accounted for. Feeding times, therapy sessions, naps, baths. Each task was checked off in a binder that seemed to govern their lives. Amina could see the logic behind it. James was desperate. He had hired her not just to care for his children, but to make sure they met milestones he feared they would never reach. But as she watched Clara and Elijah stare blankly at the walls or quietly sit on their play mats, Amina began to realize something essential was missing. They weren't living. They were existing. They needed more than just schedules and therapies. They needed experiences. They needed to feel alive. One afternoon, after another failed attempt to engage the twins with a new toy, a brightly colored stacking tower that had been expensive enough to be considered an investment, Amina stood still in the nursery, watching Clara and Elijah. The toys, the cribs, the picture-perfect nursery. It all felt like a glass cage. Clara sat in front of the stacker, looking at the pieces but not touching them. Elijah was still in his high chair, his fingers frozen on the tray, staring at nothing. Amina sighed, a pang of frustration tightening her chest. She had been hired to follow the rules, but every instinct in her told her those rules weren't enough. The twins needed real-life experiences. They needed stimulation from the world beyond these walls. The warmth of the sun, the smell of fresh flowers, the sounds of life. For all the money in the world, James couldn't buy that for them. She knew that had to change. That afternoon, she made her decision. She would take them outside. As the twins napped, Amina quietly slipped into the foyer, gathering the stroller, a blanket, and a bag of essentials. She didn't tell anyone. Mrs. Peters, the housekeeper, was busy preparing lunch, and she didn't need to be asked for permission. James had made his feelings clear enough in their earlier conversations. Nothing was to happen outside the mansion unless he approved it first. But Amina wasn't going to wait for permission. The twins had been isolated for too long, and she couldn't just sit back and watch as they slipped further into their quiet world. They needed to experience the world, to see people, hear music, and feel the touch of grass beneath their feet. When she carefully wheeled the stroller outside and locked the mansion door behind her, Amina's heart raced. She wasn't sure what she was expecting, but it certainly wasn't what was about to happen. The streets outside the mansion were vibrant with life. The busy sounds of the city, car horns, people laughing, children playing, flooded Amina's senses. She pushed the stroller down the sidewalk, keeping a steady pace, watching as Clara and Elijah slowly began to react. They had been staring at the same walls for so long that the outside world seemed almost overwhelming. Clara was the first to react. Her little eyes widened as they passed a flower shop. The bright colors of the blossoms caught her attention, and Amina watched as Clara reached toward them, her fingers stretching from the stroller. "That's it, sweet girl," Amina whispered, smiling to herself. "You see the world now." Elijah, sitting next to his sister, was mesmerized by the street performer across the street. A man with a guitar strummed a lively tune, and for the first time, Elijah looked up, his eyes following the music. His fingers twitched in response, and Amina felt a surge of hope. She couldn't explain it, but it was as if they were waking up. Back at the mansion, James was in his study, reviewing financial reports from Morgan Industries, when his phone buzzed with a call from Mrs. Peters. His hand froze over the papers. His heart dropped as he saw the name on the screen. "Mr. Leclerc, Miss Bennett. She's taken the children outside," Mrs. Peters said, her voice tinged with shock. James's stomach twisted. "What do you mean, outside?" he snapped, trying to mask the panic in his voice. "The twins." "They're in the city, sir. Without permission." There was a pause before she added, almost nervously, "They seem to be fine, but..." "She took them, Mr. Leclerc. She just left." A flood of anger and anxiety rushed through James. His first instinct was to get in the car and drive to wherever they were. But he held back, not wanting to lose control completely. Amina had gone against his explicit instructions, but she'd done so with an intention that was becoming clearer in his mind. She didn't believe in the cage he had built for his children. His heart pounded. How could she do this? The thought of his precious twins outside, exposed to the unknown, made his blood boil. But then, a strange thing happened. A sliver of curiosity crept into his thoughts. Maybe, just maybe, something had changed. Amina pushed the stroller through the park, and as the day wore on, it became clear to her that the twins were reacting in ways she hadn't expected. They were active. They were engaged. Every new experience seemed to bring out a new emotion in them. Elijah clapped his hands when a dog ran by. Clara giggled when a child her age waved at her. For the first time in months, Amina felt like the twins were finally, truly living. She let them explore the grass, feeling it under their bare feet. Clara crouched and ran her hands through the grass, her fingers trailing over the blades. Elijah followed suit, his curiosity growing with every step. He bent down to touch a flower, his tiny fingers brushing the petals as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "Look at you two," Amina murmured, her heart full. "You're discovering the world." The twins' faces lit up with joy as they took in the world around them. Clara's eyes sparkled, and Elijah, for the first time, smiled. A full, unguarded smile. When they returned to the mansion, it was nearly dinner time. Amina wheeled the stroller through the gate, her heart still racing from the exhilarating experience. She knew James would be furious, but she also knew something had shifted. The twins were alive in a way they hadn't been before. James was waiting in the doorway, his arms crossed and his jaw clenched. The fury in his eyes was unmistakable. "Miss Bennet," he began, his voice tight with control, "I gave you one simple rule. Do not take them out of the house." "I know, Mr. Leclerc," Amina replied, her voice steady. "But they needed it. They needed the world, not just a room full of toys and schedules. They needed to see life." James opened his mouth to argue, but then his eyes flickered to Clara and Elijah. His heart skipped a beat. The twins were babbling to each other. Clara reached up to Amina's leg, and Elijah followed suit, his arms outstretched. They were responding to the world now, and Amina couldn't hide the pride in her eyes. How are they doing that?" James whispered, his anger faltering for a moment. "They're engaging," Amina said softly. "They've been locked away in their own world for so long. They needed to be exposed to more than just therapy. They needed life." James stood there for a long moment, torn between his frustration and something else. Something that felt almost like hope. The twins were not the same as when he had left them in their nursery. He wasn't sure what to think, but deep down, he couldn't deny it. Amina might just be onto something. James sat in the study, his fingers drumming lightly on the polished surface of the desk. His mind was a whirlwind of confusion. His twins, Clara and Elijah, had barely begun showing signs of engagement, babbling, clapping, even reaching out for things, and he couldn't understand how or why. Amina's disobedience had caused an internal conflict he hadn't expected. On one hand, he wanted to be furious with her for breaking his rules. On the other hand, he couldn't deny the subtle changes in the twins. They were responding to the world in a way he had never seen before. He stared out of the window, his thoughts 1,000 miles away. His mansion, his perfect life, had suddenly felt less perfect. In the past, his world had been entirely controlled. His children, his business, his every move. The illusion of order and stability was all he had known. But now, seeing Clara and Elijah smile, laugh, and reach out for Amina, he felt something shifting within him. It was something beyond just the twins' development. It was the realization that he hadn't truly been present for them, not in any real way. Finally, he stood up and walked towards the nursery. Amina was sitting on the floor with the twins, helping them with a simple game of stacking blocks. Her smile was warm, patient, and undisturbed by the tense atmosphere James had been carrying all day. "Miss Bennet," James began, his voice low but firm. "We need to talk." Amina looked up, a flicker of concern in her eyes. She placed the blocks down gently beside Clara and Elijah before standing and walking toward him. "Of course, Mr. Leclerc," she said softly, her expression unreadable. "Sit." James motioned toward the armchair across from his desk. His tone was neutral, but there was a tension in his shoulders, a slight crack in his usual composure. Amina hesitated for a moment, but then nodded, sitting down in the chair, folding her hands in her lap. She had always been patient with him, giving him the space he needed, but she could sense the storm brewing in his eyes. "I don't understand, Amina," James began, his voice more strained now. "How is it that my sons, after all this time, are suddenly showing signs of progress? After everything, the doctors, the therapists, the nannies, nothing seemed to work. And then you just take them out of the house, against my orders, and—" He broke off, his words faltering. "They're different now, but I don't know how." Amina's gaze softened as she listened. She knew this moment would come. He was trying to make sense of something that didn't fit into the rigid world he had created. It was painful to watch him struggle with it, but she had to be honest with him. "You're right, Mr. Leclerc," she said gently. "Your sons are different now, and they're changing because they're getting something they've never had before. Something more important than therapy or schedules. They're getting connection." James frowned, his brow furrowing in confusion. "Connection? What are you talking about? They've been connected to everything. Therapists, nannies, schedules." Amina took a deep breath, then leaned forward slightly. "I don't mean the kind of connection you're thinking of. I mean emotional connection. They've been locked in a world of isolation. Physically, yes, but also emotionally. They've never really connected to anyone, not to you, not to the world around them." James opened his mouth to argue, but stopped himself. He had never truly thought of it that way. He had been providing everything material, everything they could need to survive and grow. But had he truly been present for them in the ways that mattered? Had he truly seen them? "I don't understand," James muttered, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "What do you mean, emotionally?" Amina's eyes softened with empathy. "They've been surviving, Mr. Leclerc, but they've never really lived. I can see it in them. They're not just delayed in their physical development. They're emotionally disconnected. They don't know how to trust, how to engage with the world, because they've never been given the space to explore it, not in a safe, warm, nurturing way." James felt his chest tighten, the truth of her words slowly sinking in. He had done everything to shield them from the world, the dangers, the noise, the mess. But in doing so, he had kept them from learning how to live. He had kept them from experiencing love in its most basic form. Amina continued, her voice steady but filled with understanding. "The twins need real, unstructured experiences. They need to feel the world. When I took them outside, it wasn't just about seeing flowers or hearing the music of the street performer. It was about giving them a chance to feel something different, to connect with their surroundings, to have their senses awakened. It's the first step toward emotional healing." James sat back in his chair, staring at her in disbelief. The thought of his children being disconnected from the world, from him, felt like a punch in the gut. He hadn't seen it, hadn't realized how much his own fear had shaped his parenting. He had been so caught up in protecting them from everything, he hadn't allowed them to live. "I thought I was protecting them," James said quietly, his voice breaking slightly. "I thought I was doing the right thing by keeping them safe, by making sure nothing bad could happen to them." Amina nodded, understanding. "I know. But sometimes, keeping them in a bubble doesn't help them grow. It keeps them stuck, trapped in a world that's too small for them. They need to experience the messiness of life, the unpredictability, the joy, the chaos. That's what will help them heal." James ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. Amina's words struck a chord deep within him. He had always been so careful, so precise in his actions. But his precision had kept him from something more important: vulnerability. He had been protecting himself from the pain of losing his wife, and in doing so, he had closed himself off from his children. "I can't keep doing this," James said, his voice barely a whisper. I can't keep hiding them away from everything. Amina's gaze softened with compassion. You don't have to be perfect, Mr. Leclerc. None of us are. You just have to show up for them. Be there for them, not just as their provider, but as their father. James looked at Amina, the weight of his grief and his guilt slowly starting to lift. For the first time, he realized that the road to healing wasn't about more money, more control, or more therapy. It was about love, connection, and presence. He wasn't just a CEO, a businessman who ran a successful empire. He was a father. And that meant embracing the messy, unpredictable beauty of life with his children. Amina's voice broke through his thoughts. Mr. Leclerc, I know this isn't easy, but you have to start participating in their growth. Let go of the control and embrace the chaos. Let them feel the world, and let yourself feel it too. James nodded, his mind now filled with a new sense of determination. I don't know how to do this, he said quietly, but I want to learn. I want to be the father they need. Amina smiled gently, her eyes filled with kindness. You're already on the right path. As the conversation came to a close, James felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The twins, Clara and Elijah, were just beginning to come alive, and so was he. The road ahead would be long, and he knew there would be challenges. But for the first time in months, he was ready to face them, not as a businessman, but as a father. And with Amina's guidance, he knew he wouldn't have to walk that path alone. Amina sat quietly in the corner of the nursery, watching the twins. Clara and Elijah were sitting on their playmat, surrounded by a variety of toys, a soft, plush bear, a set of colorful blocks, and a ball that squeaked when squeezed. The room was silent, except for the occasional rustle of toys and the soft, rhythmic hum of the air conditioning. She had been with the twins for a little over a month now, and the changes were undeniable. They had begun to engage with the world around them. They smiled more often. They reached for things, touched objects, and even responded to simple sounds. But there was still a long way to go. Amina had already decided that their growth couldn't be confined to scheduled therapy sessions and strictly regimented routines. It had to involve play, real, unstructured play, where the twins could feel the freedom to explore their environment. And now, she was going to ask James to join them, not as an observer, but as an active participant. James had been reluctant at first. He was always polite and respectful, but there was a distance between him and his children. His grief had built a wall around his heart, and no amount of logic or advice seemed to break through it. Still, Amina had hope. She knew the key to healing was for James to be present with the twins, not just physically, but emotionally. She glanced at the door, where James was standing, his figure outlined by the soft light filtering in from the hallway. His expression was conflicted, unsure of how to step into this new role as a father, as someone who had to be more than just a provider. Amina, James began hesitantly, stepping into the room. I don't know what to do. Amina smiled at him, her voice calm but warm. You don't need to know everything, Mr. Leclerc. Just be with them. Let them see you. Let them feel you. James stood still for a moment, watching his children. Clara had rolled over onto her stomach, pushing herself up with her hands, a small expression of determination on her face. Elijah was tapping the colorful blocks together, the sound sharp and echoing through the room. It's hard, you know, James muttered, his eyes never leaving the twins. I don't know how to be a father to them. Every time I look at them, I think about Sophia. Amina understood. She had seen the way his gaze softened when he spoke of his wife. The pain so raw, it was almost tangible. "It's okay to feel that," she said gently. "But you can't let that stop you from being with them. They need you just as much as you need them." James turned to look at her, his face tight with frustration. "I don't know what I'm doing. I'm afraid I'll do something wrong." Amina's voice was soft but firm. "You're not going to hurt them, James. You're already doing better than you think. But you need to try. Take a step. Play with them. They won't bite." James let out a deep sigh, clearly torn between his fear and the desire to do what was best for his children. Slowly, he stepped toward the playmat, kneeling down in front of Clara and Elijah. He picked up a block, unsure of what to do next. Amina watched quietly from the side, waiting for the moment when he would break through his emotional barriers. At first, James's interactions with the twins were stiff and awkward. He didn't know how to make them laugh, how to coax a smile from them. Every time he picked up a toy and offered it to them, they would either look at him blankly or reach for the toy without much interest. The silence in the room felt heavy. The more he tried to engage, the more he seemed to fail. Amina knew it wasn't easy. She had seen fathers struggle with similar challenges, men who were good providers, good workers, but who had never learned how to be emotionally present for their children. The problem wasn't love. It was fear. Fear of failing, fear of the unknown, and for James, fear of opening up to the very thing that had caused him the most pain. Loss. She stood and quietly walked over to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You're doing fine, James. Just keep going. Talk to them. Tell them what you're doing. Engage with them, not just physically, but emotionally." James glanced up at her, a small, uncertain smile tugging at his lips. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted. "You can," Amina said, her voice filled with confidence. "They're listening. They might not understand everything, but they're taking it in. Just give them the space to react, to respond in their own time." And then, as if on cue, something changed. James picked up a soft, plush bear and held it out to Clara. "Clara," he said gently, his voice low but warm. "This is Mr. Bear. Do you want to play with him?" At first, Clara didn't respond. She simply stared at the bear, her tiny hands hovering just above it. Then, to James's surprise, she reached out, her fingers brushing the toy. She pulled it toward her chest, hugging it tightly. James's heart skipped a beat. A smile, shy but real, tugged at his lips. He glanced at Amina, who was standing a few steps away, watching the moment unfold. "You see?" Amina said softly. "You're making a connection." James couldn't speak for a moment, his eyes locked on Clara as she clutched the bear, her expression filled with wonder. He had seen something that morning he hadn't seen in weeks, the first signs of a breakthrough. Clara was opening up. She was responding to him, to his presence. Amina stepped back, giving James space. She had done her part. Now it was time for him to continue the work. The more he interacted with Clara and Elijah, the more they would come out of their shells. As the hours passed, James felt himself becoming more comfortable in his role. It was awkward at first, like trying to learn how to walk again after years of being still. But with every small moment, Elijah giggling when James made a silly face, Clara reaching for his hand, her tiny fingers wrapping around his, he began to feel something change within him. Amina stayed in the background, watching quietly as James interacted with the twins. She could see the shifts happening, the subtle but significant changes in his approach. The walls he had built around himself were beginning to crumble, piece by piece. When it was time for dinner, Amina gathered the twins and placed them in their high chairs. James, feeling more confident now, sat at the table beside them. For the first time, he didn't feel like an outsider in his own home. He was a father, a real father, one who was present, engaged, and ready to give his children the emotional support they needed. "Do you think they'll ever talk?" James asked Amina, his voice soft as he spooned mashed peas into Clara's mouth. "They will," Amina replied with a gentle smile. "But it's not just about talking. It's about being with them, showing them love, and teaching them that the world is a safe place to explore." James looked at Clara, who was now giggling as she grabbed the spoon from his hand, and then at Elijah, who was reaching for his father's hand, his tiny fingers curling around James's fingers. "I think you're right," he said quietly, his voice filled with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. "It's not just about talking, is it?" "No," Amina said softly. "It's about breaking the silence and letting them know they're loved. That's the first step." James nodded, his eyes misting with tears. For the first time in a long while, he felt hope. His children were finally starting to break through their silence, and so was he. The air in the nursery felt warmer, more alive than it had in months. Sunlight filtered through the large windows, casting a golden glow over the room, where Clara and Elijah were playing. Their once still faces now displayed curiosity and engagement, their eyes darting between toys and each other. The silence, once thick and oppressive, had given way to the occasional giggle or soft gurgle. Amina sat nearby, watching them closely, her heart swelling with pride at how far they had come, however, stood a few feet away, leaning against the doorframe. His arms crossed loosely, his gaze fixed on his children. He was still amazed by the progress, unable to fully process how quickly things were changing. Weeks had passed since he started spending time with Clara and Elijah. They had made more progress than he ever thought possible. Small moments of joy, laughter, and connection had begun to stitch together the emotional fabric that had been so painfully absent before. But today felt different. It was almost as if the air itself held its breath, waiting for something monumental to happen. Clara, sitting cross-legged on the floor, suddenly glanced over at her father. Her small eyes locked onto his, and a smile, so pure and untainted, spread across her face. For a moment, it seemed like time stood still. Then, with an effort that was both cautious and determined, Clara placed one hand on the floor and slowly shifted her weight. She pushed up, her little body trembling as she balanced herself on her knees. James's heart leapt in his chest as he watched his daughter's movements, his breath caught in his throat. He knew what was coming. Clara took her first step. It was hesitant at first, a tentative wobble as she shifted her weight from one foot to the other. But then, just as Amina had encouraged him to do, James knelt down to her level. He opened his arms, a smile spreading across his face that was more genuine than he had felt in years. "Come on, Clara," James whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You can do it." Clara took another step, then another, until she was standing right in front of him, her little arms outstretched. A soft, delighted giggle bubbled up from her throat as she reached for her father. James, overwhelmed by the sight, scooped her up, pulling her into a tight embrace. Tears welled up in his eyes as he kissed the top of her head. This moment, this breakthrough, felt like a dream. He didn't realize it at first, but as he held Clara close, he felt a shift within himself. For the first time, he wasn't just her provider. He wasn't just the father who paid for everything and kept everything organized. He was present. He was the one she reached for, the one she trusted to catch her when she took that leap into the unknown. It wasn't just a physical step that Clara had taken. It was an emotional one as well. James looked at Amina, who had been watching quietly from her spot in the corner. Her expression was serene, but there was a glint of pride in her eyes. She knew the significance of this moment. "Did you see that?" James said, his voice cracking as he spoke, the weight of the moment overwhelming him. She walked. Clara walked. Amina smiled softly, standing up and moving toward him. "Yes, James." She did. And she wasn't just walking physically. She was walking toward you, towards love, towards trust. James was silent for a moment, holding Clara in his arms as if he were afraid to let go. The weight of what Amina had said settled over him like a soft blanket, and he suddenly understood something that had eluded him for so long. Clara had taken her first steps because she felt safe enough to do so. She had felt secure in the love that had been slowly but surely built around her. The emotional wall that had surrounded her and Elijah for so long had cracked piece by piece because of Amina's consistent nurturing presence, and because of James's growing willingness to let go of his need for control. Amina approached him, her voice quiet but firm. "Do you see now, James? The love you've been so afraid to give is what motivates them to grow. It's the emotional safety you create that allows them to thrive." James nodded, his throat tight with the realization. The tears he had been holding back finally began to spill over. He wiped them away quickly, not caring who saw them. I thought I was doing everything right," James murmured. "I thought my money, my status, could give them everything they needed. I was so focused on making sure they had everything materially. I didn't realize it was this, the love, the connection, that they truly needed." Amina gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've always provided for them in ways only a father can. But what they needed most was you. Not the man who controls everything with precision and schedules, but the man who lets go and shows them love." James swallowed hard, processing the weight of Amina's words. He had always prided himself on being the provider, the protector. But it wasn't enough. He had built walls around his children to keep them safe from the world, but in doing so, he had denied them the very thing they needed to grow. The freedom to explore, to feel, to trust. And now, as he held Clara, he realized that his fear, his grief over Sophia, had prevented him from seeing what his children truly needed. They hadn't needed more rules, more structure. They needed him. They needed a father who could sit with them, play with them, and, yes, feel with them. It wasn't until he stopped trying to control everything that he could finally give them what they truly needed. James gently set Clara down and turned to Amina. "I don't know how to thank you for this," he said quietly. "I don't know how to make up for all the time I wasted." Amina smiled, her eyes warm with understanding. "You don't need to thank me, James. You're doing it now. You're here. You're learning. And that's what matters." Before James could respond, a small hand tugged at his pant leg. Elijah, having watched his sister walk, now stood there, his own hand stretched upward. He was looking at James with wide eyes, as if waiting for the approval he needed. James crouched down to Elijah's level, his heart swelling with pride. "Come on, buddy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You can do it too." Elijah hesitated, but after a moment, he took a step, then another. His tiny legs wobbled, But he managed to take a third step toward his father before falling into his arms. James laughed, tears mingling with the joy on his face as he scooped Elijah up in a big hug. "You did it, Elijah. You did it." The twins, now both standing on their own 2 feet, giggled as they snuggled close to their father, each holding onto him for balance, each looking at him as if they had found the safety they had been searching for. As Amina watched the scene unfold, she felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. The twins were no longer just growing physically. They were learning to trust, to engage, and to love. Their first steps weren't just physical milestones, they were emotional breakthroughs. And now, James was beginning to understand what he had missed all along. "James," Amina said softly, stepping closer to him. "Love is the foundation of everything. It's what allows children to grow. It's what makes them feel safe enough to take that leap. They can't thrive in a world where they feel isolated or controlled. They need to feel free to explore, to fall, and to trust that you'll be there to catch them." James looked at her, his eyes wide with understanding. "I get it now. I see it. It was never about the money or the perfect environment. It was about giving them a chance to experience the world, to feel my love, to trust me." Amina smiled, nodding. "Exactly. And now you're showing them what it means to be loved, what it means to be alive." As the days passed, James became more involved in the twins' growth. He no longer hid behind schedules or plans. Instead, he let the moments unfold naturally. He spent time with Clara and Elijah, playing with them, talking to them, and allowing himself to be vulnerable in ways he hadn't been before. The twins responded in kind, their emotional connection to him growing deeper with each passing day. James realized that love wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity. His children didn't need more toys, more money, or more rules. They needed a father who was present, who would laugh with them, cry with them, and guide them through the chaos of life. And for the first time, James felt truly connected to his children. The change wasn't just in Clara and Elijah, it was in him too. As he watched the twins explore the world with more confidence, James knew one thing for certain. The greatest gift he could give them wasn't control. It was love. And now, finally, he was ready to give it to them, completely and without reservation. James couldn't remember the last time he had felt this connected to Clara and Elijah. Each day seemed to bring new milestones, not just for them, but for him as well. His heart, once tightly locked in grief and fear, was beginning to thaw, little by little. Every laugh, every giggle, every tiny moment of progress made him feel like he was stepping into a role he had been too afraid to embrace. He had always provided for his children, but now, for the first time, he was truly present. Emotionally, physically, and mentally. He was sitting on the floor of the nursery, the twins in front of him, their tiny bodies crawling around the soft carpet. Clara was reaching for a toy, her little face filled with determination, while Elijah was babbling happily, his hands clapping together as he laughed at the sounds he was making. James smiled, his heart swelling with pride as he watched them. He never could have imagined this moment a few months ago. He never could have imagined the bond they shared now, one that was built not just on his role as their father, but on the emotional connection that Amina had shown him how to create. "Amina," he called softly, his voice carrying a hint of wonder. "Look at them. Just look at them." Amina, who had been sitting at the doorway, watching with a quiet smile, walked over and knelt beside him. "They're doing great, aren't they?" she said, her voice calm and full of warmth. "They're not just doing great," James responded, his eyes never leaving the twins. "They're thriving. I'm really seeing it now." Amina gave him a soft, knowing smile. "It's amazing, isn't it? It's amazing what love can do. You're giving them what they need, James. And they're responding." James let out a breath, watching Clara reach for a stack of colorful blocks, her tiny hands grasping at them with a concentration that made his heart ache with pride. "I never thought I could do this," he admitted, his voice thick. "I always thought I wasn't cut out for this, that maybe I couldn't give them what they needed." Amina placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "James, you were always capable. You were just locked in your own grief and fear. But now you're letting go. And that's when the real change happens. You're a father to them, not just a provider." James nodded slowly, his gaze softening as he watched his children. He was beginning to understand the truth behind Amina's words. He had thought that by keeping them safe in the bubble of his wealth, he was doing his duty as a father. But safety alone wasn't enough. They needed more. They needed love, attention, and connection, things that no amount of money or control could buy. It was only when he truly let go, when he opened his heart to them, that he began to see them flourish. Amina's role in this transformation couldn't be overstated. At first, she had been a caretaker, a necessary part of the household. But now, she was much more than that. She had become an integral part of the family dynamic, both as a caregiver and as a partner in raising the twins. Her influence on James and on the children was profound, and she had become a bridge between James and the emotional needs of his children. Her calm presence, her steady guidance, had allowed James to step into the role of father in a way he hadn't thought possible. She didn't just look after the twins. She taught him how to be a real father, how to engage with them, how to open up emotionally, how to embrace the chaos that was parenthood. It wasn't just the practical aspects that Amina helped with. It was the emotional ones, the ones that James had long avoided, buried beneath the weight of his grief. She didn't push him to open up all at once. She allowed him to take it at his own pace, while subtly guiding him through the journey of fatherhood. James had learned to trust her, not just as an employee, but as someone who had become a vital part of their lives. She was more than just a nanny now. She was a co-parent, a trusted partner in raising Clara and Elijah. In the mornings, Amina would help James with breakfast, guiding him through the little tasks that were part of their new routine. She'd show him how to make the twins' favorite breakfast porridge, and she'd smile when he asked, "Is this too much? Too little?" It was the small moments like these that helped James begin to feel more confident in his parenting. The afternoons were spent together in the nursery, playing games, reading stories, or just letting the twins explore their toys. Amina often took the lead at first, knowing that James was still working through his emotional walls. But over time, James found himself participating more, asking questions, and even making his own suggestions. One afternoon, as Amina read aloud a children's story, James joined them. He sat on the floor next to the twins, his legs crossed awkwardly at first, but as the hours passed, he began to relax. Clara had crawled into his lap, her small fingers tugging at the book, her eyes wide with curiosity. For the first time, James didn't feel like a stranger to her. He felt like a parent. He felt the same bond forming with Elijah as he sat beside him, watching the little boy's eyes light up at the sight of the pictures. "Do you want to help me turn the page?" Amina asked, smiling at James. He hesitated for a second, then nodded. "Sure." He turned the page, his heart swelling with the simple joy of the moment. Clara giggled and pointed at the pictures, her eyes sparkling with life. Elijah, too, was fully engaged, leaning forward as if he understood what was happening. The warmth in the room was palpable, and for the first time, James realized that he didn't have to be perfect. He just had to be present. And in that presence, he found a kind of peace. As the days passed, the bond between James and the twins deepened, and his trust in Amina grew. The tension that had once been between them, the awkwardness of their professional relationship, began to dissolve. They were no longer just employer and employee. They were partners in raising the twins, sharing the weight of the responsibility that came with parenting. James found himself asking Amina for advice more often. He trusted her instincts, her experience with children, and the way she had patiently guided him through the ups and downs of fatherhood. He knew that without her, he would still be struggling to find his footing, still distant from the children he so desperately wanted to connect with. One evening, after the twins had gone to bed, James sat at the kitchen table with Amina. The house was quiet. The sound of the twins' soft breathing, the only noise that filled the space. "Amina," James said, his voice sincere, "I just want to thank you. I don't think I've ever really said it, but I don't know where I'd be without you." Amina smiled, her expression gentle. "James, you're doing it. You're being the father they need. I'm just here to guide you. The work is yours." James shook his head. "No, I couldn't have done it without you. You've taught me more than any book ever could." Amina's gaze softened, and she placed her hand over his. "It's been a team effort, and I'm proud of you." James looked at her, his heart full of gratitude. He could see how much Amina cared for the twins, how deeply invested she was in their growth and development. She had become more than just a part of their routine. She had become a part of their family. As the weeks passed, the household's dynamic continued to shift. The mansion, once silent and filled with the weight of grief, now echoed with laughter and the sounds of life. Clara and Elijah were thriving. They were no longer the silent, distant children they had once been. They were engaged with the world around them, reaching for new experiences, and most importantly, they were engaging with their father in ways James had never thought possible. And James? He was changing too. He was learning to let go of his need for control, to embrace the messiness of parenting. He was learning that it wasn't about providing the best material things for his children. It was about providing emotional support, presence, and unconditional love. For the first time in a long time, James felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. A family. A real family. Not one built on wealth or status, but on love, trust, and connection. And for the first time in his life, James felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. James stood in the doorway of Sophia's old bedroom. The door cracked open just enough for him to see the once tidy space now frozen in time. He hadn't entered this room in over 2 years. The last time he had seen it, it had been right after Sophia's death. Still filled with the life she had left behind, her clothes, books, perfume, and the small things that made the room feel like hers. Since that day, the room had remained untouched, locked away like a chapter he couldn't bear to revisit. But today, for the first time, James knew it was time. He had to face this part of his past, face the pain that he had shoved into a corner of his heart, tucked away behind the walls he'd built around himself. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision. This was the moment of reckoning. Pushing the door open fully, James stepped inside. The scent of Sophia's perfume lingered in the air, faint but still present. It hit him like a wave, memories flooding back, too many to process at once. He looked around at the untouched space, the bed where they had once shared quiet moments together, the dresser, the mirror, her favorite chair in the corner by the window. Everything was exactly as it had been when she passed. He walked toward the dresser, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for the drawer. He pulled it open, revealing a stack of neatly folded clothes, the ones Sophia had worn during the final months of her life. He ran his fingers over the fabric, a knot forming in his throat. How could he have let this go on for so long? How could he have avoided this for so long? Sophia had been everything to him, his partner, his love, the mother of his children. The weight of losing her had consumed him. But he hadn't just lost her. He had lost the man he was before, the one who could feel joy, who could love without the weight of grief pressing him down. And as much as he wanted to protect himself and his children from that pain, he now understood that he couldn't move forward without confronting the past. James pulled open another drawer, finding some of her old journals, pages filled with her hopes, dreams, and ideas for the future. He had never read them, too afraid of what they might contain. But today, he needed to know what had been left behind. As he flipped through the pages, a single photograph fell out. One of Sophia holding Clara and Elijah just a few weeks before the twins were born. Her radiant smile was unmistakable, her eyes full of love. The image struck him deeply, and his heart felt like it was cracking open all over again. His eyes blurred with tears, and he let them fall. The pain of her absence was still there, raw and fresh. But something was different this time. For the first time, he didn't feel as though he was drowning in it. He could finally breathe through the pain. It was time to let go. Amina had been in the hallway, knowing that James was taking this step, but giving him the space he needed to confront his grief on his own. She had stayed close by, offering support without being intrusive. She had learned that the process of healing wasn't linear, and that everyone grieves in their own way, at their own pace. For James, this moment of reckoning was essential for his healing. But it also marked a turning point in his relationship with the twins, with himself, and with her. After some time had passed, Amina gently knocked on the door and stepped inside. James was still sitting on the floor, holding the photograph of Sophia. The room was quiet, save for the soft sound of his breathing and the slow, deliberate exhale as he wiped away the last of his tears. "You okay?" Amina's voice was soft, but there was no judgment in it, only understanding. James looked up at her, his eyes red but filled with a quiet sense of acceptance. I think I can finally breathe." Amina nodded, walking over and sitting beside him on the floor. She didn't try to rush him, didn't offer words of comfort that might feel too soon. Instead, she just sat beside him, offering the silent support he needed. "You've been holding on to this pain for so long," she said quietly, her voice filled with empathy. "But you don't have to hold it in anymore. Sophia's memory will always be a part of you, a part of your children, but it doesn't have to keep you from moving forward." James wiped his eyes again, his voice hoarse. "I've been so afraid to let go of her, to let her go in a way that feels like I'm betraying her. But now I see that I can carry her memory with me without letting it consume me." Amina placed a hand on his arm, a simple gesture that meant more than words ever could. "You're not betraying her. You're honoring her. You're living your life for yourself and for the children, just as she would have wanted." James nodded slowly, taking in Amina's words. He felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted off his chest. But there was still more to process, more to uncover. His grief wasn't gone, it never would be. But now he could hold it without letting it drown him. "I need to be there for them," James said, his voice firmer now. "I need to be there for Clara and Elijah in a way I wasn't before. I can't keep hiding behind my pain." Amina smiled softly, her eyes filled with encouragement. "You're already doing that. Look at how far you've come. The connection you're building with them. It's everything." James glanced at the door, where Clara and Elijah were playing just outside the room. He could hear their soft voices, the sound of their laughter echoing in the hallway. They were growing, learning, thriving, just as he was. And for the first time in a long while, he realized that he didn't have to carry all the weight of his grief alone. Over the next few weeks, James continued to heal, with Amina by his side every step of the way. Her role in the household had shifted from caretaker to co-parent, but also to emotional support for James. He trusted her more than ever now, not just as a nanny, but as a partner in raising his children. Amina never overstepped. She allowed James to navigate his own emotional landscape, offering a listening ear when needed, but never forcing him to open up. She knew that his healing process was his own, but that didn't mean he had to do it alone. One afternoon, James and Amina were sitting in the living room, the twins playing at their feet. Amina was reading a book, and James was lost in thought, watching his children as they explored. "I've been thinking about Sophia," James said suddenly, breaking the silence. "About how I've held on to this image of her that's kept me from truly living. I think it's time for me to find a new way to remember her, not as the person I lost, but as the woman she was. A mother. A partner." Amina smiled warmly, setting her book down and looking at him. "That's the first step. And I think Sophia would be proud of you. She would want you to heal, for yourself and for your children." James nodded, feeling the weight of her words sink in. "I want to be the father they need. I want to be present for them. I don't want them to grow up feeling like they missed something." "You're already doing that," Amina reassured him. "Look at them. They're thriving because you're there. You're not perfect, James, but you're trying. And that's all they need." James turned to look at her, his expression filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Amina. I don't know what I would have done without you. You've not only helped them, you've helped me." Amina smiled, her eyes warm and filled with understanding. "We're in this together, and it's an honor to be here with you, to see you all heal." As James looked at Clara and Elijah, who were now playing and giggling together, he felt a sense of peace. His past would always be a part of him, but it didn't have to define him. He had learned that healing wasn't about erasing the past, it was about integrating it into his life and moving forward. And with Amina's support, he knew he would be the father his children deserved. James sat in the study, his hands steepled together in front of him. His gaze fixed on the papers scattered across the desk. His mind, however, was far from the details of the documents in front of him. Instead, his thoughts kept returning to Amina, how integral she had become to their lives, and the role she had taken in helping him rebuild not only his relationship with Clara and Elijah, but his own identity as a father. The past few months had been nothing short of a transformation. The twins had flourished in ways he had never imagined. Their first steps, their laughter, the way they sought him out in the mornings with their chubby hands reaching for him, all of it was a testament to the bond they were building. It was clear that Amina had been the catalyst for their growth, nurturing them not just physically, but emotionally. Her presence in their home had brought the light back into a space that had once been so darkened by grief. But now, as the days and weeks passed, James couldn't shake the thought that kept circling in his mind. What would happen to their family when the twins were older? Would Amina continue to be a part of their lives? Could he truly imagine a future without her in it? The truth was, he couldn't. Amina had become irreplaceable. Her unwavering support, her ability to guide him through the challenges of fatherhood, and her deep love for Clara and Elijah had woven her into the fabric of their family. It was more than just the care she provided. It was her emotional presence, her steady hand when he faltered, her understanding of what it meant to love without hesitation. He had come to rely on her not only as a caregiver, but as a co-parent, a partner in raising the twins, one who had helped him heal and grow alongside them. It was time to make a decision. James leaned back in his chair and exhaled deeply, his fingers brushing over the edges of the papers in front of him. He couldn't keep putting this off. He needed to talk to Amina. He had thought about it for days, weighing his options, considering what was best for the twins and for their future. As much as he had grown in these past few months, he knew one thing for certain. He didn't want to lose the support that Amina had given him. He didn't want her to leave. She had become more than just a person in their lives. She had become family. And if they were to move forward, if they were to keep growing as a family, she needed to stay. With a final deep breath, James stood up from the desk and walked toward the living room, where Amina was sitting, as always, quietly observing the twins. Clara and Elijah were playing with their blocks, the sounds of their laughter filling the room. "Amina," James said, his voice calm but firm. "Can we talk?" Amina looked up from where she was sitting on the floor, her eyes filled with warmth. "Of course, James. What's on your mind?" James sat down beside her, watching the twins as they played. "I've been thinking a lot about the future, about us, about everything." Amina raised an eyebrow, sensing the gravity in his tone. "What do you mean?" James turned to face her fully, his expression serious but sincere. "Amina, you've become a part of this family in ways that I never could have imagined. You've helped me, and you've helped Clara and Elijah more than I can express. Your presence here has made all the difference." Amina's heart skipped a beat, her chest tightening with emotion at his words. She had grown to care deeply for James and the twins, but she hadn't anticipated that James would see her as such a vital part of their family. She had always considered herself a caretaker, a guide, someone to help him through this challenging time. But now, hearing him acknowledge her importance, made her feel seen in a way that she hadn't expected. James continued, his voice steady. "I've come to realize that I don't want you to leave. I don't want you to be just an employee, just a nanny. I want you to be here permanently. Not as someone who comes and goes, but as a co-parent, as a partner. You've done so much for us, and I can't imagine going forward without you. So I want to offer you a permanent position, one where you're a full part of this family." Amina's breath caught in her throat as she processed his words. It was a lot to take in, more than she had expected. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Her heart was filled with gratitude, but also with hesitation. She had always felt a sense of responsibility toward the twins. She loved them as her own. But this was different. This was a commitment. A commitment not just to them, but to James as well. A commitment to a future she hadn't fully considered. "James," Amina began, her voice soft. "I don't know what to say. This is a lot. I never imagined that I would be a permanent part of your family like this. I came here to help, to guide, and to be there for the twins. But I never thought about the long term. I never thought about what it would mean for me to stay. James looked at her with sincerity, his expression open. I understand. I know it's a big decision, and I don't expect you to make it lightly. But I also know that you're a huge part of their lives, and of mine. You've helped me grow, Amina, and I want to give you the stability you deserve. I want to make sure you're here for the long haul, if that's what you want. Amina looked down at the twins, watching them as they babbled and giggled. They were so full of life now, so much more engaged than they had been just a few months ago. She had seen their growth, their emotional progress, and it filled her with a sense of pride that she couldn't put into words. But more than that, she felt connected to them in a way that was deeper than just caregiving. She had become a mother figure to them in her own way. And to James, she had become more than just someone who helped him navigate the rough waters of fatherhood. She had become someone who had helped him rediscover himself, someone who had stood by him as he worked through his grief and loss. She had been there for him in ways that no one else had been. Finally, after a long pause, Amina met James's eyes. "I've never imagined myself as part of a family like this," she said softly, her voice full of emotion. "But I can't deny the bond I've formed with Clara, with Elijah, with you. I love them, James. I love you all. And I want to be here for them. For you." James's face lit up with relief and gratitude. "So, you'll stay?" Amina nodded, a gentle smile spreading across her face. "Yes, I'll stay. I want to help you raise them. I want to see them grow into the people they're meant to be. And I want to be a part of this family, for as long as you'll have me." The next few days were filled with conversations about what this new chapter would look like. James and Amina discussed everything from day-to-day routines to the bigger decisions they would face as Clara and Elijah grew older. They agreed that they would work together to create a stable environment for the twins, one that balanced structure with the freedom to explore and grow. James made it official by offering Amina a formal position as co-parent. It wasn't just a job anymore. It was a partnership, one that honored the love and commitment she had shown his family. He understood now that their relationship wasn't just about taking care of the twins. It was about building a family together. Amina's role as a co-parent was solidified, and both she and James were ready to face the future as a united front. They weren't just raising children. They were building a family, one that was grounded in love, trust, and mutual respect. The decision wasn't easy for Amina. She had come to care for James and the twins in ways she hadn't anticipated. But she had always been cautious about the long-term implications of her role. She had started this journey as a caretaker. But now, with James offering her a permanent place in their lives, she had to ask herself what it meant to commit to this family in a deeper way. Her heart, however, knew the answer. She had become so intertwined with their lives that the idea of leaving now was simply unimaginable. She loved the twins, and she loved James. The connection they had formed over the months, the way they had supported one another through their individual journeys, was something she couldn't ignore. "Yes," Amina had said, smiling as she looked at the twins, her heart full. "Yes, I'll stay. I want to be a part of this family, for as long as you'll have me." The future now seemed full of possibilities, of laughter, love, and the shared journey of parenthood. Together, James and Amina were no longer just two individuals trying to make it through. They were a family, and they were ready for whatever the future would bring. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe, like, and share for more.